You have probably seen Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell being quoted many times for his 10,000 hour rule to master a skill. It says that in order to be an expert and master in your skill, you need to practice it for over 10,000 hours. I was intrigued and researched more about the book. The Wikipedia description convinced me further. It says, in Outliers, Gladwell examines the factors that contribute to high levels of success. As a self-help junkie, I would jump right on and finish this book in 2 days. I was going in with low expectations, as I expected it to be a repetition of all the business books and biographies of successful people that I had read before, like Shoe Dog by Phil Knight, Elon Musk by Ashley Vance, or Steve Jobs by Walter Isaacson. However, I was pleasantly surprised. As the title suggests, it talks about the things that's not written or only briefly mentioned in other books, such as Bill Gates gaining unlimited access to a computer in his teenage years in the 1960s, the Beatles playing for over 10,000 hours in a club, Bill Joy having the opportunity to tinker with computers, and more. These things are usually mentioned in a single sentence and are brushed off in other books, but Malcolm Gladwell explored them in detail and talks about how the experts in their fields practiced a lot. This roughly adds up to 10,000 hours before someone becomes an expert. I will first start off by talking about the 10,000 hour rule and each person's advantage. Later on, I'll be talking about how there are different golden ages for different groups of people, and also the book talked about how luck is undeniably a factor in success. Let's now start off with the 10,000 hour rule. I've seen this being quoted before, with some people being huge believers of this principle, while others think that this is overrated and oversimplified. Here's a quote from the book about how it got the 10,000 hour rule. Emerging picture from such studies is that 10,000 hours of practice is required to achieve the level of mastery associated with being a world-class expert in anything, writes the neurologist Daniel Levitin. Now I'll be talking about how there were different experiments conducted to find the 10,000 hour rule. Here's another quote from the book. The striking thing about Erickson's study is that he and his colleagues couldn't find any naturals, musicians, who floated effortlessly to the top while practicing a fraction of the time their peers did. Nor could they find any grinds, people who worked harder than anyone else, yet just didn't have what it takes to break the top ranks. Their research suggests that once a musician has enough ability to get into a top music school, the thing that distinguishes one performer from another is how hard he or she works. That's it. And what's more, the people at the very top don't just work harder or even much harder than everyone else, they work much, much harder. Later on in the book, they talk about how you need 10 years of experience in order to be a world-class expert on a topic. Well, why 10 years? Well, that's roughly how long it takes to put in 10,000 hours of hard practice. 10,000 hours is a magic number of greatness. The book later on talks about how the Beatles and Bill Gates were able to achieve success using the 10,000 hour rule. Here's an example for the Beatles. By the time they had their first burst of success in 1964, the Beatles had already performed live an estimated 1,200 times. When talking about Bill Gates, they mentioned that in one 7-month period in 1971, Bill Gates and his cohorts ran up to 1,575 hours of computer time on the ISI mainframe, which averages out to 8 hours a day, 7 days a week. It was my obsession, Gates said. Now that was the 10,000 hour rule, and another thing that the book really cemented was the idea that we all have our own advantages that we can leverage to be successful. No one starts off with nothing and gets everything. Everyone has something. The hard part is finding out what that is and executing it. For me, it may be reading all these books and writing or making YouTube videos. For you, it may be being really into plants and home decor. You can leverage that opportunity and become the best home decor blogger or YouTuber. Another really interesting idea from the book was that there are different golden ages for different groups of people at different periods of time. Take, for example, the list of the 75 most wealthiest people in human history. Of those, 14 were Americans born in the same period of the 1830s. These were people such as John D. Rockefeller, who is the richest person in modern history, who was born in 1839, Andrew Carnegie in 1835, and J.P. Morgan, who was born in 1837. This was because in the 1860s and 1870s, the American economy went through its biggest change. This was the time period when railroads were being built and Wall Street merged, and these people are lucky to have been in their prime years then and take advantage of the situation. Well, what about an example closer to our current timeline? Bill Gates, founder of Microsoft, Steve Jobs, founder of Apple, and Bill Joy, founder of Sun Microsystems, were all born in 1954 and 1955, which allowed them to be ready for the personal computer age in the 1970s. This, and their experience already dealing with computers, allowed them to come ahead of the rest and become an outlier. Maybe it is now a golden age for remote businesses due to the 2020 pandemic. Malcolm Gladwell also talks about how one's culture affects people using a variety of studies and examples, which are really interesting to read. I'll now end off with a quote from the book. Biologists often talk about the ecology of an organism. The tallest oak in the forest is the tallest not just because it grew from the hardest acorn. It is the tallest also because no other trees blocked its sunlight. The soil around it was deep and rich. No rabbit chewed through its bark as a sapling, and no lumberjack cut it down before it matured. We all know that successful people come from hardy seeds. But do we know enough about the sunlight that warmed them, the soil in which they put down the roots, and the rabbits and lumberjacks they were lucky enough to avoid? These were my main takeaways from this book, and if you're interested, you can check out my notes and Kindle highlights at shavesh.com/outliers or in the description below. Like and subscribe if you found this useful, and see you in the next one.